okay? The landowner's passing on significant amounts of your property, his property tax, to you all. Well, immigrants are living, okay, in America, often in trailer parks, often in rentals, often crammed together in pretty close quarters, and they're not paying any official tax, but they're paying taxes on property by indirectly through their landlord, okay? They're paying sales taxes. Florida has both an income and sales, you're just a sales tax, just a sales tax state. So they're collecting all kinds of money from immigrants thanks to the sales tax. There isn't even an income tax that they're dodging, okay? They're paying income taxes in some states as well, right? So taxes are being paid by immigrants, and the estimated amount is somewhere between 125 and 175 billion per year. Think about the sequester. There's all this drama right now over 85 billion per year. We'd at least have that problem solved for 2 months if we just kept embracing immigrants, all right? In this world where there's no money, where we're looking like under every rock for money, at least that's the rhetoric of Washington, okay? Hey, there's some money, let's take it, okay? Myth 5, money gets sucked out by immigrants. How many of you have had like a trade class, like an international economics class or a trade class? A few of you. This argument's a little difficult to understand, but I hope I can bring it down to a level that's quite clear. When you buy things from abroad, okay, there's no such thing as like a big sucking sound where money goes away and then America's worse off for it. In the national macroeconomic statistics, there's something called the trade deficit that a lot of people worry about. It's the statistic that we should be worried about the least, paying basically no attention to at all, okay? There's a similar argument when it comes to immigration, that what's happening when we give money to illegal immigrants is they take that money and they send it out of the country, back to their families in Mexico, or back to their families in China, or wherever the illegal immigrant is coming from. And that this is somehow harming America because the money is leaving the system. Right? This is just nonsense, okay? And here's one way I hope I can demonstrate how it's nonsense. Let's imagine that that money goes to Mexico and never comes back. I personally would say, great, there's less money in America. And if there's less money in America, we all would be slightly better as a result of that, ever so slightly. If that money goes to Mexico and never comes back, it's basically like some kind of deflation that we've experienced in a tiny, tiny way. If we all took the cash out of our wallets right now, put it in a pile and burned it, anyone with cash remaining would be slightly better off. Do you all understand that? So if we all burn our cash, I don't think we should try it, all right? Especially since I have hardly any. I need a little bit in case I get robbed on the way home, okay? If we take all of our cash, put it in a pile here, the United States experiences an ever so slight deflation in the money supply. And that deflation means anyone with currency remaining experiences an incremental increase in value. It's kind of a logical point, very basic. It's arithmetic, okay? If money goes to Mexico and never comes back, the value of our dollars goes up a tiny little bit. Now, I don't think money is going to go to Mexico and never come back. In fact, it'll come back into the country. We'll call this foreign direct investment. The Chinese buying bonds, the Chinese buying companies in America. And when they do that, I personally will say hallelujah, okay? Thank you for buying things that are made in America. That's great. You're putting your money back to work in our economy. You think that it's worth betting on America. It's a closed system, and there's no such thing as a sucking sound. But people somehow say immigrants are just taking our money, and they're like moving it someplace outside of the world, like to Mars. They've moved the money to Mars, all right? It makes no sense. But it's something to distract from the fact that immigrants are actually a benefit. Myth 6, just a few more to go. Immigrants erode traditional values. All right. You all have probably heard this argument. It's one that people in Alabama make quite often. Alabamians are very proud of their heritage. When you see people who are different than you and they look different than you, they speak a different language than you, at first it's a little bit intimidating. If any of you have traveled abroad, you know how it feels when you're like the outsider. You go to I've been to the Czech Republic a couple of summers. I've been to Botswana. I'm like this weird person who's like the outsider, and everyone's like, wow, he doesn't know a word of what I just said, okay? And that's intimidating. When immigrants come, it's intimidating for those who are the majority too, right? But they're not breaking down traditional values in the way that people want us to think. So one of the claims that's often made is if you bring in a lot of people from, say, Latin America, it's often made against Mexicans and Puerto Ricans. If you bring them in, they're going to so erode our culture that what makes America great won't be there anymore, okay? I'm sure some of you have heard this. What makes America great is that there are some old Americans who are still here preserving the Constitution and protecting liberty. Something kind of like that. That's nonsense, okay? In fact, Americans have been very good at eroding the thing that was great about America. We did most of that, okay? The greatest generation did a lot of that. Our generation is doing a lot of that. It has very little to do with immigrants. Remember, they're illegal. They can't even vote, all right? What's done most of the damage in America? The vote and the people that we elect and send off to Washington, D.C. The nanny state, which I completely despise, the notion that someone can tell me how big of a big gulp to drink, okay? That someone in Alabama can tell me what days of the week I can have a beer, all right? And if it can be a draft beer or a bottle beer, all right? They actually regulate whether I can have a draft or a bottle beer. I hate this, but we did it to ourselves. No immigrant did that to me. We did it to ourselves. But there's this argument that there's lots of deviant moral values, really deviant behavior that we're going to encounter if we just open the doors to immigrants. That's wrong. And there's actually some pretty good data on this that indicates that things like, what would you look for if you were looking for deviant behavior? One of the things I would look at is crime rates. We're actually much, much worse to each other than immigrants would be to us. So immigrants would actually improve the crime statistics if we let them come, all right? We're really bad on other Americans. American on American violence is what's driving a lot of the crime statistics. Marriage rates. Immigrants stay married a lot longer than Americans. So some indicator of a deviant moral value would be that you just go in and out of marriages real quickly. We do that. Lots of that, okay? Religiosity. If you think religion is some kind of proxy for good moral values, the immigrants coming are more religious than the Americans that are here, okay? So the things that you would look at for like a proxy for culture are actually really strong in the immigrants who would be coming. And in fact, if you're a little bit more open-minded, think of the great things that immigrants bring in some areas that we call the good life. Food, music, art, entertaining conversation, all right? Think of how stale life would be if the only people you were talking to were people that you've been around your entire life. If I go to my neighbor and I talk about, what'd you do this weekend? Watch the Crimson Tide win again, okay? They win a lot. They win a lot, okay? Think of how boring that is versus meeting someone from somewhere far away who isn't like you. That's a far richer experience to talk to someone who isn't like you, okay? I would say that's raising traditional values and raising culture if we can have more people like that. Just a couple more. We can't have open borders because it's going to actually encourage terror, all right, and violence. The immigrants are going to come and they're going to plant the seeds to the destruction of liberty. They're going to attack us. All right, this is one that I actually heard this on the way down here today. I was listening to talk radio. It's good to keep your ear to what other people are thinking. And one of the things they're thinking about immigration is that, so the Republican Party is having this real spiritual conversation right now. Should we be more open to immigrants? Marco Rubio is like the candidate of openness, perhaps, okay? So they're having this internal spiritual dialogue with themselves. And of course, talk radio is talking about the spiritual dialogue. And one of the things that was being said today was that, we can't have foreigners because they breed terror. Again, just nonsense, all right? You have to just have a good nonsense detector, okay? That's just a completely outrageous claim. More integrated societies, I think, are actually a lot more peaceful. People who work in the intelligence community have looked at What cities in America are among the safest? Here's some trivia. Anyone want to guess what major city in America is the safest, according to some recent intelligence research? Yeah.
San Antonio, Texas.
No, they're not integrated enough.
Bozeman, Montana.
Go north. Go to Michigan.
Detroit.
Detroit. Who said Detroit?
No.
Detroit is actually a really safe city. Let me pass that. Listen, Detroit's a safe city when it comes to a terrorist attack. Okay? Now, listen, what you might be saying is, well, Detroit's a safe city from a terrorist attack, because why would you dare try to attack Detroit? That's not the causal story. It's that Detroit's actually a really integrated city with pockets from many different countries of the world, large populations who have settled there, and it's a place that terrorists would look at and say, I really don't need to attack it. So there's this idea in foreign policy, that if people cross borders, you're less likely to attack those places that have people that are like you there. Okay, it's much like the trade argument, except it extends to people. If you think about 9/11, every one of the people involved in 9/11 was here legally. So if we're going to use immigration policy, think about this. We're going to use immigration policy to protect against terror. That's like a really blunt instrument. If someone wants to attack us and they're determined to do so, they'll become legal and then do it, okay? So why in the world would you use immigration policy to do it? How about strengthening the police force? Maybe reallocating some of the immigration resources to protecting people. If you're using immigration policy to do this, it suggests your law and order is really breaking down, okay? Maybe there's a failure in defense, perhaps. It certainly shouldn't be addressed through immigration policy. I can talk more about that point in questions and answers, perhaps. Myth 8, we're wrapping up now. Immigrants are bad for America. None other than Alan Greenspan, back in 2007, was responsible for the statement here in this slide. We used to be a melting pot, but now seem to have some trouble with that. I think that's sad. Greenspan's really kind of interesting. He's become the Federal Reserve Chairman who's blamed in large part for the financial crisis. He deserves some of that blame. He kept rates really, really low in the early 2000s. But he did have some pretty neat ideas about how to deal with the fact that we had a housing glut. Think about the housing market. We still have about a year's supply of housing. So if we just kept demanding housing at the same rate we have been, it would take a year to exhaust all of that supply that's on the market. A year of people buying houses at the rate they are. Nobody else build a home. Everyone stop building. It's still going to take us a year to clear out the supply. When you have an excess supply, it's going to be very depressing for prices, and it implies like a really screwed up market, right? You have a surplus. You all know from your principles classes, you shouldn't have a massive surplus of a resource. So how could we get rid of a surplus? One way would be to just knock down communities, okay? Like Phoenix, Arizona has communities where no one's living in them. Okay? Phoenix has subdivisions where no one is living in the community. We could just burn them. Burn the community that has no one living in it. But that would be really wasteful, right? It'd be really, really wasteful to burn houses that actually have some value. A far better approach, perhaps, would be to tie immigration and housing together. Come to America, buy a house, we'll make you legal. Okay? In fact, this is an idea that some Democrats have been behind. It's an idea that Alan Greenspan was very open to, but it has gone nowhere as actual policy. Okay? Seems like it would make sense. You're alleviating a housing problem, and you're giving people paths to citizenship in America. Instead, what we're doing is just a really crazy set of policies that are hard to make sense out of, that require expertise in the legal market, and that just arbitrarily pick people out of the country if you're unlucky, if you get picked up at the wrong time. So what should we do? This is my last slide here. What should we do? I think that first best, remember, we're basically at like 11th best. So I've got first best and second best. We're down at 11th best right now, okay? So we've got a long ways to go. I personally would love to see the borders open and let people move around as they see fit. I think that openness in America is wonderful. The fact that I can move from Alabama, say, to Florida at a really low cost. There are some costs. I have to go to the DMV again, which is absolutely horrible, okay? But think about what people wanting to come to this country are doing. It's like the DMV for years and years and years of their life, okay? And at a tremendous cost. You need a lawyer who's like a mastermind, who can get you through the system. Think about what he's making on that deal. And he's making it again and again and again. It's a policy that rewards people who find like some really magical path to getting here. They found the password. That's not a system that's based on any kind of equality under the law, not a system that I think any of us should be very proud of. Open borders is so far away as a possibility, but let's just remember that that's, I think, something that makes a lot of sense as the ideal. Second best, how about maybe returning to the 19th century policy? Just get a lot looser with it and say, if you don't have a major problem, if you can understand the instructions we're telling you, we'll let you in, okay? That's like dreaming as well, but it's a little less dreamful than just letting people come if they want to. Or even something perhaps a little more radical. If citizenship is something that's so great, and people really want to come to America, which I think they do, how about just auctioning off rights to it? Instead of creating years and years of hassle and regulatory snakes, how about we just auction off the rights? You want to come to America? Here's the price of coming. Remember, we've got this budget problem, okay, $85 billion, that's like this huge drama. There's some money for the government. Auction off rights to come into the country. More people will come, the US economy will gain from it, and we can deal with our $16 trillion debt in the process, all right? Again, that's dreaming. We're in 11th best, but it never hurts to dream, okay? That's all I have to say, other than I'm just gonna wrap up with one of America's very best philosophers, and I think that watching him hone in on what the fundamental problem is with the immigration policies that states are passing will give you some sense of how screwed up states are in the direction that they're headed, and it's a really good indicator for what not to do as a lawmaker. So 1 second, I'll see if I can get this up and loaded, and that will be it. Thank you all for your attention, and give me just, this is about 4 or 5 minutes. Let me see if it'll go. One of the best philosophers.
Tomatoes. They're the most delicious food that you can throw at a crossing guard. I'm a big boy and I will cross where I want. Tomatoes and their East Coast variant tomatoes are also a key part of the classic American sandwich, the BLT. And I am not saying that because this show is underwritten by the BLT Council. But to be clear, the club sandwich is a lightly toasted, unholy three-way whose sinful triple-decker existence threatens the sanctity of traditional sandwich. Read your Bible, folks. God ordained that lunch should be between 2 slices of bread, no exceptions. Leviticus 20:18. And that is not the only threat to the American way of lunch, because thanks to illegals, our country's tomato industry is plumb screwed.
In the heart of tomato country, Hispanic workers and their families are walking off the job and leaving the state in fear.
These farmers in Alabama say they're facing a crisis. Their fruits and vegetables are rotting in the fields because there aren't enough farm workers.
Farmers are reportedly short-handed because illegal immigrants have fled the state's toughest in the nation immigration laws.
Yes, Hispanic farm workers have fled Alabama, stealing yet another thing Americans would like to do. And all just because the state passed Alabama. Folks, and it's all just because the state passed an immigration bill that requires police to check papers during routine traffic stops and makes it a crime to knowingly transport, harbor, or rent property to illegal immigrants. Oh, boo-hoo, amigos. Grow a pair of whatever the Mexican word is for cojones. All Alabama was trying to do was free up these farm jobs that los ilegales are taking from Americans. But there has been a small hiccup in this otherwise flawless plan. Jim?
We tried different ways, try to get American people, and help right here, but they come one day and they quit.
It's not that easy.
they can't take the hours, and honestly, they can't take the heat.
The Americans aren't gonna get out in the heat and work, they're not gonna bend their back all day long, and they're not gonna work, and they're not as hard workers as Hispanics.
It turns out different ethnicities have different innate gifts. Hispanics are good at hard labor, Asians are good at calculus, and Americans are good at generalizing about what other people are good at. Folks, no one could have predicted this would happen, except me. Last year, in my critically acclaimed testimony before Congress, I shared my vast one-day experience working as a BLT. It is really hard. For one thing, when you're picking beans, you have to spend all day bending over. It turns out, and I did not know this, most soil is at ground level. If we can put a man on the moon, why can't we make the earth waist high? Come on, where is the funding? This brief experience gave me some small understanding of why so few Americans are clamoring to begin an exciting career as seasonal migrant field worker. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who says, "I told you so." I'm the kind of guy who makes it a banner. Liberals out there are gloating that Alabama is just reaping what it sowed. Wrong, because there are no immigrants left to reap it. Fortunately, Alabama has come up with a 21st century solution: chain gangs. Because Alabama farmers are being offered inmates to help pick produce before it rots. Now, instead of having our food tainted by illegal aliens, it'll be harvested by perfectly legal criminals. This plan worked perfectly in Georgia, other than the working part. Jim?
Georgia's Agriculture Commissioner will tell Congress today his state's tough new immigration law has left farmers short 11,000 workers. And instead of jobless Americans, some of the new workers are prisoners and ex-cons who farmers say don't work as fast as immigrants.
Immigrants who've chosen a life of crime don't have quite the same work ethic as Guatemalans who've walked through 500 miles of desert to feed their children. So, it appears that Alabama is in a bit of a bind. But Republican State Rep Jeremy Oden knows who's to blame for the problem caused by his legislation. Jim?
Look, we need a federal program, a migrant program that we can apply in our state and get these skilled laborers to stay and help these people out.
Yes, the federal government must fix this problem by sealing the state borders. I say deploy the FBI, the National Guard, the President's Council on Physical Fitness. Everybody, get them to Alabama to arrest whatever immigrants are left and throw their asses in jail. Then we can force them to pick our Because to preserve our precious BLTs, we must do whatever it takes, other than offer these people any rights. We'll be right back.
Questions? He's one of our best. That's actually a really good indicator. Maybe one of the best proxies for states that are on the wrong track is if Beaulier or the Onion are commenting on something in your state, do the opposite. I think that's a lesson from that. Questions? Yeah.
Mine's just a question about, so I probably agree with you about open borders, but I'm curious about what you mean by, how would you statistically determine that they're more religious than people who are currently in the areas they're migrating to? Yeah. How did you come up with that?
So that's compared to American religious levels. So most of the Latin American immigrants who are coming are strongly Catholic. Most Indian Americans who are coming have strong religious values. Most Middle Easterners have strong religious values. And if you think that religion is part of, just having, core values of integrity and honesty and, just things like this, And if you step back from the idea that religions could clash, I would say that religiosity is telling you something about culture. And the values, certainly based on survey data of people who are coming, are more intense than the people who are here. We've become a pretty secular nation. Religiosity in the United States is declining, with the exception of just a couple of religions. The people who are coming are more unskilled, they're less educated, but they are very devout in most cases. It's an on-average point.
Okay, I just don't know how you would grade that on a scale, I guess.
I'm not real sure how you measure culture, but if I were to start, I would say things like, people's core convictions. Do you believe in absolutely nothing, which might be fine,
Right.
okay? But it's picking up something if you say that they're devout. And I think it's also mapping into marriage rates.
Okay.
And if you're really religious, you may be inclined to commit less crime. Yeah. So they're correlated with each other into the stew that we might call having strong culture. Yeah.
How would you pay an income tax, whether it was state or federal?
If you were
An immigrant.
an immigrant, well, if you're illegal, you're not. You're basically flying under the radar. I think that if we're worried about the issue of taxation, here again, if you want everyone paying their equal share, or if you want people to come above ground, you need to give them a path to come above ground. But then you also have a problem in America of needing to give them an incentive to do so. Okay, so if taxes are going to be just awful on them, why come above ground? So I think that there's somewhat of a bargain that would have to happen where tax rates may need to come down, and in return, these people get a path to citizenship, so that they're paying some taxes, but they are gaining something in terms of citizenship. As it stands now, you're not paying a lot of the income taxes as an immigrant. In the back, yes, sir.
First of all, great presentation, and
Thank you.
totally agree we should have a policy that's as open and humane as possible. But I also believe that if you work here, you should be paid an American wage, and that goes back to your first myth about Chris and the illegal immigrant. You said that the illegal immigrant, you could hypothetically pay 25 instead of 75. My first question would be, why is the illegal immigrant willing to work for 25? And that's kind of a rhetorical question, because leaving that he's probably sending most of the money back to Mexico. And you addressed that point by saying that the money comes back in the form of foreign investments. Maybe, but not all of it. Would you agree with that?
If it's in dollars, the dollars eventually come back in some form. And if they don't, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're dealing with dollars being paid out.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of deflation, and you
Yeah.
favor deflation. Still, though, at least for the short term, you're sending money out of the country. Chris is not getting paid. So even though you have $50 left over in your pocket to go out and eat with, that's $25 that has essentially been taken out of the economy. Or at least some part of it has.
Okay.
And sent back to Mexico. It's been taken out of the local economy at least.
Sure.
So I don't know, I kind of feel like that's a negative.
Okay.
And even if, you have the deflation, which you feel is a good thing, I personally don't, because we have a lot of debt in this country, and deflation increases the value of debt, which we're obsessed with paying down. I don't know, I want immigrants to work here, but I think when an immigrant works here, should be paid the minimum wage, whatever it is.
Okay.
And I don't think a guy is going to mow an acre for $25 if he can get paid $9 an hour somewhere else, hopefully. Is what it'll be, and I think you see where I'm coming from.
I do, and there's a lot in your statement. So the thing to focus on, I think, is the notion that paying someone less is going to be damaging to the economy. So the gains that are left over from me paying someone 25 instead of 75 go into completely unseen, unanticipated new lines of production. So there's going to be demand higher somewhere else in the economy. And if we were to focus on keeping that wage at $75 for a person, we would lose out on all of that dynamic stuff that you can't see, all of the creation of jobs and of new resources that are, it's the unseen. I think that the best place to look in terms of understanding this dynamic is to look at, I'm from Michigan, look at what's happening with jobs in the industry. Okay, so you're protecting workers there for the sake of American ways of life and for high wages and maybe for some local economic gain. But it's led to stagnancy in the industry. It's led to our auto industry falling behind in terms of the quality of cars they're putting out. And I think it's really held America back. What should have happened is we should have had a dynamic auto industry, one that was entrepreneurial enough to say there's right to work labor in the South. We should be in that market. We shouldn't have, you know, if you're worried about who's doing the producing, it shouldn't have been Toyota and Hyundai and Kia in the South. It should have been the American companies, but they're so strangled by union laws and by where they can locate and how much they can produce that it ended up being foreign competition instead. All of that is stuff that could have happened had we had the more dynamic world that I'm imagining when it comes to labor exchanges and finding the cheapest producer of labor that's identical. Remember that the $25 is identical production. He's cutting the same grass, it's identical production, it's just cheaper. And I have no idea if that's a fair wage or not, but it's one that he's willingly contracted into. So I'm saying it's fair just based on that criteria.
Okay, the only, I don't want to boat out the conversation.
No, that's fine.
I'll just be quiet after this, but your model seems to assume that Chris is not spending the $75 that you pay him when you're talking about all the externalities.
Oh, he can spend it. It's an efficiency point. I wish I could draw it. If we embrace and keep Chris in the $75 job, there are tremendous deadweight losses for the economy. And it's an economic term. It's exchanges that won't happen. The pie doesn't get bigger if we protect Chris. The pie grows in a world where we allow the cheapest labor to be hired for the job.
Okay, well, I promise you. Thank you.
And I promise that that's a true economic point. Yeah.
I was wondering, on your earlier, I don't know if it was like the fourth one or
Yep.
not, you were talking about immigrants and the welfare state. And I felt like, I don't know if like the argument is different than what you were talking about. Like in yours, you were talking about how people say that illegal immigrants use the welfare state. And I thought the premise was that if we make them legal, then they're just going to come right on to the bank.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, was that?
So it could be both. So in California, there's been talk of legalizing illegal immigrants, making in one fell swoop about 11 million immigrants legal, okay? And you know why this is happening, by the way. It's a very democratic move, okay? If we make these people legal, they'll all vote for the person who made them legal. And it's, I would say, a major problem with democracy in that, you know, you're just playing a political game with a group that currently can't vote. So if all of those people indeed come into the market and become legal and then draw on the system because they're entitled to it, I would say that's a big problem with the system. Just as it is a problem when we expand Medicaid and allow more people to be eligible for Medicaid or anything else. If suddenly by adding groups, you're saying Americans are going to be bankrupted, that's the problem, not with the adding of groups, it's the problem with what you're offering in the way of benefits.
So the topic of open borders then is contingent upon fixing other.
Yeah, limiting the welfare state. Yeah, so I mean, it's something that's going to require possibly a number of get serious conversations. Let's get serious about democracy. Let's get serious about the welfare state. Let's get serious about immigration. And all of those things have to kind of happen simultaneously. If we don't fix the welfare state and we just say a lot of people have rights to citizenship, then the welfare state collapses from all of the demands on it. Which maybe some of you, I know I've talked to a few of you and you're like, yeah, let's have that happen. I'm a little scared about that, but you can imagine that that's indeed what would happen. If you're guaranteeing people who are low income all the same benefits now that they're citizens as we're guaranteeing current Americans, it'll collapse like that. So you need to fix that simultaneously with some of these other things. Yes. Sure.
I was just wondering if you have any examples of like countries who have open borders, just because I never hear it as an actual like possibility, or if it's just kind of an theoretical. This would be cool if this ever happened, but no one ever does it because it's
Yeah.
has a lot of like implications in public policy and things like
Yeah,
that.
so there are countries that turn a pretty blind eye to whoever comes, you know, and you can't get full-fledged citizenship there, but you can come and leave pretty freely. I think that the best examples we have of the openness I'm imagining are at the integrated national or large union level. So to be able to move around Europe pretty freely is an example of free movement and mobility in the direction that I'd like to see more of. To be able to move around the United States freely is an example of really successful mobility. Why not scale that up? Why not allow people to move between the United States and Mexico? Or why not just have an open world to a much more significant extent?
So just to go off that, I think that free movement might have to do something with like cohesion of currency. The fact that the European Union, a lot of them use the same currency. In the United States, like Alabama doesn't have a different dollar than Florida is.
Yeah.
That we don't have to deal with things like that. Would you then recommend sort of a currency for the entire world so
No.
that
So I think that the European Union could work just fine with lots of currencies. I think the United States was working just fine with state chartered currencies, and we'd be fine. I think that the argument that that's holding it all together is denying just the fact that it's people who are holding it together. One more thing on the open border point, cities are really where to look for successful open borders. So Manhattan has lots and lots of illegal immigrants that as long as you stay out of trouble, they'll let you stay there essentially. London, very similar. And it's working. They're working in jobs. They're willingly being hired by people who are willing to take the risk on them. They're gaining. The people hiring them are gaining. And we aren't having a bunch of terror from them. We aren't having, you know, all of these other really scary things. Manhattan and London are really great cities. And they're not decaying because of the illegal immigrants. If they're decaying, it's because of Michael Bloomberg. A lot more than the immigrants. Yeah.
I know that you said this was not exactly the best solution, but when you said that creating a market for citizenship and just selling it to these people, I have a few issues with that.
Sure.
First, that you are creating an elitist system where only the people who already have money are able to get in. Second, that seems to me like that goes against your earlier point that, you know, there should be a barrier, you know, so these people